The most exciting place on planet Earth to learn about climate change is the Arctic. That's where the environment is changing rapidly, and we have all kinds of signs of biological, chemical, and physical response to changing climate on planet Earth. A group of students from the University of Illinois and the Royal Swedish Institute of Technology were brought to the Arctic in the summer of 2012 to study the interactions, these complex interactions between the physical, chemical, and biological phenomena that are responding to an ever-increasing temperature on planet Earth. This program was part of a new initiative between the two universities called INSPIRE. And INSPIRE is the Illinois-Sweden program for educational and research exchange. This was the pilot program from that, and it was important to be able to establish a connection between the universities via the classroom, the laboratory, and the field. So the students from Illinois traveled to Stockholm and spent approximately 4 weeks in the classroom and the laboratory with the students from KTH in Stockholm. At the end of that time period, they had synthesized the basics of the historical and cultural and written record of the history of Nordic civilization in the Arctic. They'd also covered a lot of the political history of the Arctic and some of the more recent developments that are going on in terms of having the Arctic be a centerpiece for extracting natural resources. Following that original 4 weeks in Stockholm, then the class was brought to Svalbard. And Svalbard is a small group of islands that are to the northeast of Greenland. They're some of the farthest north islands on planet Earth at a latitude of about 78 degrees north. The class then launched into Svalbard, and the first initiative was to be able to set up shop and find a place to live. So we stayed in some dormitories that had been built in the early 1900s for a mining operation that had been set up in Svalbard. Ironically, the person who had owned and started this mining initiative was an American named Longyear. So Longyearbyen is the community in which all the activities of the class were launched out of in Svalbard. So in Longyearbyen, the dormitories that we stayed in were actually part of an old mining camp. Then with that as a base of operation, we had sorties that went out each day, either hiking or working along the coast, going into the town and visiting with representatives of the government or going to museums, or indeed going to other parts of the islands nearby to allow the students to make deep connections between these physical, chemical, and biological attributes of the complex environment of a changing Arctic. So the class began with a very rigorous hike that took us up the Longyearbyen Glacier, which runs down into the northern side of Longyearbyen itself. And as we marched up through the edge of the glacier, we first traversed through a vertical section of ancient Mesozoic age sandstones and shales and coals. And these coals were the target of the development of Longyearbyen originally to be extracted. Then as we worked up the section and hiked along the glacier itself, we were able to have two things happen at the same time. One of them is to be able to see the ancient environments that are preserved well in the rock record in the Mesozoic. So in this section, we saw some great dynamics of a very warm earth in which we had large forests and marshes and swamps build their way out into the ocean in this location up in Svalbard. Well, at the same time that we were witnessing this dramatic record of climate history within the rock record, we also were able to march along the edge of the Longyearbyen Glacier. Now that glacier is retreating very, very rapidly. And so the students were able to traverse the glacier, see crevasses, but also to get a good understanding of the geological history that is layered within the ice itself. And that traverse took us for several kilometers up through the section, up on a plateau of these ancient Mesozoic rocks that make the boilerplate mountains that are behind Longyearbyen, and then we traversed up and around. So that gave the students a good overview of what was present within both the ice record and the ancient geological record of Svalbard itself. Then the course proceeded to investigate what the civilization of Svalbard is all about.
My name is Mark Safstrom, and I'm a lecturer of Swedish and Scandinavian Studies at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And we are looking at some of the natural wonders that also inspired wonder in the early Arctic explorers. So from a lot of our lectures in our readings, we've been learning about the various ways that the explorers encountered the Arctic, the extreme weather conditions as well as the extreme landscape. And through their eyes, when they would write about the massive scale of the glaciers or the steep and beautiful fjord countries, one of the things that they would write about was the encounter with either extreme beauty or also another concept, the sublime, which would be beautiful but also kind of terrifying. So anything that would reduce reduce a person to incredibly small feeling in the face of the great scale of the glacier. That's the type of thing that I think in many ways inspired so many explorers to come back. Even though they had practical reasons and scientific reasons for coming, they also had very personal and sometimes spiritual reasons for wanting to come out into this intense landscape.
So the students were able to have interviews with the governor of Svalbard, meet people at the University of Norway that is located there in Svalbard, and be able to walk through the town and make an evaluation of the type of buildings, the built environment that has been placed there as a response directly to the type of harsh climate that we have in the Arctic. Another benchmark part of the course was to have the students load into these very unique open zodiacs, and these are extremely cool boats. It's basically an open flotilla that has two gigantic outboards that can roar across the surface of the ocean at extremely high rates. So all the students, to be able to be part of that, they had to wear life suits, and these life suits would seal at the neck and the wrist and the ankles. And the life suits are so important because without a life suit, you will not survive in the water for more than just minutes. The life suits allow you to be in the water and be rescued in case it turns over. So you can see that the life suits and the boats are quite a dramatic tool to use as part of the teaching effort in this environment. And part of that experience in that trip on the boats was to work our way along the coast from Svalbard, be able to see again these beautiful successions of ancient deposits and ancient climate change, but also then to start to tie in what the effect has been of modern day or recent modern civilization coming to Svalbard and extracting the natural resources of coal. Now, Svalbard is one of those completely unsustainable type of environments for human beings to live in. There's no foliage or trees, and the only way for humans to be able to live in Svalbard and create heat is to bring in fossil fuels of different types. And that's why the coals that are in Svalbard are so important, because they also then provide fossil fuels to burn, to create electricity, and to warm the homes that are on the island. So part of the trip on the boats was to go to another nearby settlement, which actually is Russian, and it's called Barentsburg. And Barentsburg was developed again about the turn of the century, and it grew into a civilization, a community that was tens of thousands of people in size. It's now much smaller. There are the remnants of coal mining activity that are still going on there, but it's a very important Russian outpost within this kind of geopolitical dynamic that's going on between Norway and Russia. Now, another aspect of bringing the students into the Zodiac boats and zipping around the ocean to these other parts of the fjords that are nearby was to take them over to another part of the geological section. The boats were taken across a fjord called Ice Fjord, and we went to a very famous fossil location called Janus Mountain. So here we have the students that are part of the Inspire group that have been working their way up through the entire section of Janus Mountain here in Svalbard. And what they've been looking at are a whole sequence of fossils that have been preserved over tens of meters of stratigraphic section. So at the moment we're sitting at approximately the Jurassic Cretaceous boundary, and we started the hike at the bottom of the Jurassic. And as they came up through the section, they moved from ancient sea floors that were under a column of water that was probably on the order of hundreds of meters, but shallower than we are now. So we started off in deeper water, then we moved to shallower water, and then moved back to deeper water. So what you're seeing is the students are rapidly collecting all kinds of organisms that lived on the seafloor, some of them clam-like, some of them ammonoids that look like nautilus that lived in the water column. We have long cigar-shaped squid-like organisms that lived in the water column. And so we're traversing the ancient ocean and comparing climate change or environmental change that are recorded within the rock record with the types of fossils that we see in this Jurassic Cretaceous sequence.
I am Dag Avango. I'm a historian from the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden. And we are standing now at the slope of Janusfjället at the entrance of the Sassen Bay on Spitsbergen. And we have talked about geological layers today, but this landscape is also full of historical layers of different sorts. And for the context of this course, I think it's important to point out that there is a geopolitical layer in this landscape, the history of Arctic geopolitics, and in particular Swedish and US Arctic geopolitics at this particular place. Spitsbergen was a no man's land in the early 20th century, belonging to no one. And in 1906, Norway started to take measures to achieve sovereignty over Spitsbergen, which met opposition from many governments with political interests in this region. One of them was the United States, one of them was Sweden, others were Russia and Great Britain. And at the same time as this political battle started, there was also a mining boom taking place here on Spitsbergen, with mining companies establishing mining settlements in different places, but also who claimed large areas of land that they did not use for mining, but which they nevertheless claimed as their properties. Right behind us here is a big peninsula called the Bynsavland. This area was a Swedish claim, well protected by the Swedish mining company who had claimed it, and encouraged to keep on claiming it by the Swedish government, because the Swedish government, just like the government of the United States, wanted to keep Norway from achieving sovereignty here. And a little bit further to the left over there, it's a place called Anservika. At both these sites, the Swedes opened up gypsum mines. But they did not take the gypsum away from there. They did not bring it back to Sweden to sell it. They just broke it off from the ground and placed it on the shore so that it would look like the Swedes had some kind of economic activity there. They also built little huts by the natural harbors that existed on the Bynsavland at very strategic points where it was visible from the fjord. And they also left a lot of tools in visible places, tools that would show that these places worked. And this had to do with, on one hand, the mining laws of the time in many nations that said that in order to keep a claim for mining, you have to work it. But it was also related to the international law of the time, the law of effective occupation, which said that in order to claim a no man's land, you must have some kind of activity there. So these huts and these symbolic mines, these representations of work in the form of holes in the ground and in the form of tools, functioned as tools for both the mining companies to protect their properties, but also for the governments to show that they had effective occupation and thereby a right to influence the political future of this land.
And so we looked at this complex, beautiful, intricate dance between the biology, the climate, the rocks, the water, the ice, all the components that make up this incredibly dynamic environment called the changing Arctic. So that was what the course was primarily composed of, and it set a benchmark for how integration across these widely disparate fields can actually be brought together with a real focus, and in this case the focus was a changing Arctic. So thanks to the INSPIRE program, students are given this absolutely unique opportunity to learn how to approach extremely complex questions that have to do with global climate change and how the Arctic will respond and change in the future, and put it in a context for them that has to do with learning how different disciplines work, but also to engage and develop friendships and colleagueships with people from around the world as we look at this global phenomenon called climate change.
Produced by OCE Atlas Digital Media at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.